Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back again to Compass Points, the podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, news, education, really anything that gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined, as always, by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing well today. This is, we're taping this a little bit early in the week, so getting it done and over with before the weekend starts is nice.
And especially this weekend, because this weekend, as we wrote about on Compass, our website, today, we are taping this on Thursday, is the Big Ears Festival.
Absolutely. The Big Ears Festival is kicking off today. It's Thursday. By the time this is released, will be the final day of the festival, which is Sunday. And it's always an interesting and enlightening experience, I find. I go to Big Ears every year, and it's I always am rewarded with some surprise acts that I've never heard of before, that in a genre that I've never listened to, and it's always fun.
Yeah, I agree. And we will have some further coverage of Big Ears on the website on Monday. We'll have a wrap-up of photos from the weekend. So for those of you who are not getting out and about, we'll at least show you a little bit of what goes on there. All right, we have several things to talk about this week. We have an interview coming up with Jim Snowden, Knox County's Senior Director of Engineering and Public Works. He's going to catch us up on the Advance Knox process, which is heading toward its conclusion after about a year of work. We are going to talk about an upcoming charter school application at the Knox County School Board and some reaction to that this past week. We will get an update on that election bill that could affect Knoxville City Council races. We're going to talk about a ruling in a significant lawsuit involving Knox County schools, minority contracting at the downtown stadium. We have talked about this before. Yes. We have a little more information on that. But I think we need to start off this week by talking about something that is not strictly Knoxville news, but certainly there was a lot of reaction here, and in particular, one of our local representatives got a lot of attention for their reaction to it, and what that is, sadly, the tragic, really horrible shootings at the Covenant School in Nashville this past Monday. As I'm sure everybody listening to this knows, there were 6 people killed there, 3 9-year-old students murdered in their own school. And 3 school employees, including actually the head of the school, the longtime head of the school. She'd been there for 20 years, also killed. And then, of course, the Nashville police did respond there and fairly quickly and killed the shooter. So, on the one hand, Scott, this is one of those events that at this point feels always shocking and yet also not surprising in the broad sense, because unlike, I mean, I'm sure we both remember, say, the Columbine shooting 25, 26 years ago. At that point, it felt unthinkable that somebody would bring guns into a school and just start shooting children. Sadly, in the time since then, while it still, I think, feels unthinkable, it's become something that we understand as a kind of regular feature of our lives, I guess.
Yeah, it's. I don't want to say we're getting used to it, because, like you said, it's still every time one of these happens, the reaction is kind of visceral but now I think we go, oh, it's to be almost to be expected from time to time now. It's like you said, it's becoming, part of who we are, sadly.
We know it's going to happen somewhere, sometime. We just don't know where and when. And of course, the closer it is to us, sort of geographically or in any other sense, I think the more of a gut punch it feels like. But I was thinking about that earlier this week because, of course, there's been sort of talk over the years about, well, these are, people not wanting these to become normalized. And I don't really feel like it's become normalized because, I mean, I don't know about you, but to me, and I think to most people, it still feels, like a gut punch every single time it happens. It's not like that initial reaction somehow is reduced. Every time you hear it, every time you see, the pictures of the victims, to me anyway, it's always, it's deeply upsetting. Of course, for those of us who are parents, and all of us here at the podcast production are parents, I think it carries that kind of extra, you think about your own children. But I think for people who aren't parents, it's, it's not much of an imaginative leap to feel the horror of it. And, so very predictably, of course, we then, part of the cycle that we go through is the political dimension of it, which can take somewhat different forms depending on the incident, but almost always comes back to some people, usually, more liberal lawmakers, Democrats in general, will come out and call for increased gun regulation, and conservatives and Republican lawmakers will come out and call for sort of anything but increased gun regulation, often a focus on mental health, because almost always the perpetrators, and the perpetrators can kind of have a range of backgrounds or specific grievances. In this case, the shooter was a former student at the school, but we don't, as of right now, really know a whole lot more about why. This was clearly a person with mental issues. Their own family has come out and said that they tried to keep the shooter from having guns. I'm avoiding pronouns because it's a little murky. The initial reports, at first the police said that it was maybe a transgender woman. Now it seems kind of the reverse, that it was maybe a transgender male. It was somebody who kind of grew up and presented female, but apparently was using male pronouns, and so it's a little bit murky. But regardless of that, clearly this was somebody who was troubled. Their family was concerned about them. Their family was trying to take guns away from them, and was not able to. Partly because in this state we do not have. There are states that have what they call red flag laws, where somebody who is close to somebody and believes that that person is going to do harm to themselves or others, is a danger, essentially, can petition a court to have their guns taken away, sort of at least temporarily. And bills like that have been proposed in Tennessee. So that's one of the things that happened. Our own state representative, Gloria Johnson here in Knoxville, one of our two Democrats in the delegation, she has introduced bills in the past to create a red flag law in Tennessee, and she said this week, I'm going to introduce this bill again. Those bills have not succeeded in the past. There's been no indication from Republican leadership in the state that they have any appetite for revisiting any of that. In fact, we still have bills active in this legislative session right now to further loosen gun restrictions in Tennessee, taking the age that you can legally concealed carry a weapon from 21 to 18.
Right.
And of course, we've had a whole list of, over the last 10 years in particular, kind of every gun regulation that existed in Tennessee 10 years ago has either been abolished or significantly reduced. Governor Bill Lee made a very emotional video responding to the shooting, noting that he and his wife knew two of the victims personally because she had taught with two of them. They knew the head of the school. They knew a teacher who was killed at the school, who was just a substitute teacher that day. She was just filling in, and she got murdered. And she was apparently First Lady Maria Lee's, one of her best friends. They were going to have dinner that night. And so, you can't say that the tragedy is not touching and affecting the governor in very significant ways. At the same time, in that statement that he made, he said, we will stop this from happening again. But he also said, and this is something you often hear in the wake of these incidents, especially from people not interested in talking about gun regulations, he did say, now is not the time.
Right. Yeah.
And, we average one shooting per day in a school somewhere in the country. Now, most of those are not these mass shooting incidents. Many of those involve students themselves who are in disputes with other students or things like that. But, if you kind of say that we can never have a policy discussion within a certain time frame of a school shooting, we may never be able to have that policy discussion.
You wouldn't be able to do it. It's kind of like saying, well, we can't have a discussion about this on a day ending in Y.
Right. So, do you expect to, even with this having happened so close, sort of geographically in proximity to where the legislature meets, it was right in Nashville, do you expect to see anything sort of substantive on the regulatory or restrictive side come out of the legislature?
It's tough to say. I think that every legislator, every public official brings their own experiences to their job, and this, is, as you said, it's hitting close to the governor and his family, and you don't know how that's going to, affect him. If it's going to, maybe he might be a little bit more open to something. Maybe a red flag law, I don't think he's going to turn around tomorrow and say, well, we're going to ban all assault weapons in Tennessee.
Right,
That's not going to happen. But
no, clearly not.
But I think that you would think that he would be able, that he might kind of reconsider some of his previous stances in opposition to some measures that could,
or look for some kind of policy solutions, I guess, that are not related to firearms. I think the problem with that is that we don't have a lot. There's a lot of talk about mental health, and of course the state, there has been discussion at the state level and here at the local level about increasing and improving mental health services. At the same time, there isn't really any, because these kinds of incidents in particular, of course, most shootings, even things that we call mass shootings, which is 3 or 4 or more victims, are not this particular kind of horror where it really is, where it feels random, where the victims don't even have any connection with the shooter. It's such a tiny percentage even of our overall gun deaths in this country, because most of our gun deaths, first of all, a huge percentage of our gun deaths are suicides, and areas with more guns, states with more gun ownership, do have higher rates of suicide, and I don't think that can be sort of discounted when we talk about gun deaths. Suicides are part of it, and then most of the rest of them, they're domestic violence, they're criminal activity, drug deals, things like that, they're brawls, fights at a bar or whatever. It's usually some kind of interpersonal relationship that goes bad. These kind, even though they're a tiny percentage of the shootings that we have, I think hit us all differently because they feel so random, and because the victims can be so innocent, can be 9-year-old children.
Yeah, well, yeah. One of the things is, you read about, shootings that are involving possibly involved with drugs and things like that. Well, if you're not buying drugs or selling drugs, you're probably not going to be in it. A victim or someone you love is probably not going to be a victim of a drug-related shooting.
Right.
I mean, it's the thing. But these, because they're random, it could be any school.
Yeah.
It could be the school your kids go to, and so that is one of the things I think that makes it stand out as well, and it may, frankly, with as you said, in firearms, it's a very small percentage of the deaths, but it might be, it's the kind of horrific event that does at least get people talking about what can be done.
Yeah, and I think that there's been a lot of focus in recent years with school shootings in particular, and of course school shootings themselves are just a subset of, because we also have these mass random shootings at grocery stores, movie theaters, churches, synagogues. Honestly, it's kind of hard to think of a major civic institution, and I'm not going to try to think of any, because I don't want to jinx it or something, give anybody ideas about other places you could do this. But with schools in particular, there's been a real focus on security. And in this case, the school doors were locked. Of course, in some instances, there's been cases where people apparently got in through doors that weren't locked. But in the security footage from this shooting, the shooter just approached and shot out the door, which, I suppose you could start getting into things like, well, let's make all school doors bulletproof. Let's put bulletproof glass everywhere. These kind of, increasing efforts to turn public areas into fortresses, which can have their own kind of negative connotations, because we want our public spaces to be accessible, to feel open. Part of feeling secure in a space, to me, is not feeling like you're locked in a fortress, that you're just in a place where it's okay to be and kind of do whatever you're doing. So maybe we'll see more proposals along those lines. So one of the responses that did get a lot of attention this week, Governor Bill Lee said, we are going to stop this from happening again, although he didn't offer any indication of how. And I don't know that, frankly, I don't know any of us believe him, because I don't know any of us can think of something that would, under our current circumstances, that would stop this from happening again. But he at least kind of said that. Our congressman, Representative Tim Burchett, was grabbed by an NBC reporter along with a couple of other congressmen to talk about this, because he's from Tennessee, and he's there on the steps of the Capitol, I think, is where the interview took place, and he just said, it's a horrible, horrible problem, and we're not going to fix it. That was his quote, and then he said, criminals are going to be criminals. He said something. He told a story about his father, who had been in World War II and fought in the Pacific, and his father had said something to him, if somebody's determined to kill you, they're just going to do it. That analogy may be a little bit off tone-wise to invoke a battlefield when we're talking about, is that really the analogy? Is this how we see our elementary schools now, that they're actually, fields of combat? But it was really that first statement, we're not going to fix it, and criminals are going to be criminals. That's what got people's attention, because it the reason we have government in a representative democracy, we elect people to deal with things that we care about as people, whether it's economic issues, environmental issues, whatever those are, and it's a little disheartening, maybe, to hear the leaders you have elected to deal with things you care about. This is obviously an issue people care about. You can look at the polls across the board. People care about gun violence, and they believe, Democrats and Republicans alike, majority of Republicans even in a lot of polls, believe there are things the government could do and should look at. And so it feels a little deflating, maybe, in that moment of tragedy, to have somebody just say, we're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, well, it's unusual, to say the least. to have a public official be so fatalistic about something. Just say, oh, well, we can't do anything about that. It's it's rare. That even in instances where you can't do something about do anything about something, like a major storm or something like that, you can they'll talk about things you can do to prepare for the next one or something. And just to see an elected official just kind of throw up their hands and say, oh, well, dead children and teachers is the price we pay for living in the United States.
Right.
And that's kind of shocking.
Well, and, in a certain sense, it is in character with Burchett, because Burchett has always had a fairly skeptical attitude toward government. He comes from kind of a small government, quasi-libertarian, conservative perspective. And, this is not the first time I've heard him say something sort of fatalistic about government, like, oh, we're just going to mess it up. Like it's kind of one of his default settings, I think, to just say government can't do anything about it, or in some cases government shouldn't do anything about it. I think in this particular instance, when you are literally looking at dead children, it doesn't quite rise to the level of what people want to hear. Yeah. Even if people in their hearts might kind of think they're probably not going to do anything about this. In that sense, maybe what he said is more realistic than what Governor Lee said. But it's not the rhetoric that I think people necessarily want or expect from their elected leaders. And it did get Burchett a fair amount of quite negative notoriety on social media. The Guardian newspaper, the British newspaper, it prompted them to do sort of a whole dive into Burchett's legislative past, both in the state legislature and in Congress. And kind of the point of that article was to say, well, he doesn't seem to always think this. And they kind of listed a bunch of bills he'd introduced and things that he had, that basically on issues that he cares about for one reason or another, he seems willing to engage and to say, well, here's something we could do or here's something we should do. He does introduce legislation. And so it's not that he thinks government can never do anything. And so he also was kind of called out on The Daily Show, which currently has rotating guest hosts because Trevor Noah has stepped down from it. And so John Leguizamo, the actor and comedian, has been hosting it this past week. And he zeroed in on that clip of Burchett saying that. And I just want to read this response because, as with our own Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally being featured on Saturday Night Live a few weeks ago, it's not that often that our local legislators get featured on and or responded to on national media. This statement does have a couple of swear words in it, so if any of our podcast listeners have delicate ears, you might want to fast forward a minute or two, but this is just a quote from what John Leguizamo said. He played Burchett's statement, and then he said, quote, there's not a heck of a lot you can do about it. That's the best you have to offer. You're a congressman. If you don't have any ideas for how to keep our kids safe, get the fuck out of the way and go work at a Pinkberry or some shit. Pinkberry is a gourmet yogurt place, for those not familiar with that brand. So that's the kind of reaction that Burchett generated. Now, does any of that matter to Burchett? I don't know. Maybe he's used to getting a lot of negative reaction from things. There's nothing to indicate that, I don't know that this hurts him politically in the 2nd district or anything. But it's, when you look at somebody's sort of like legislative history or history as a politician, one of the things that people often look at is how did they respond in moments of crisis. And for better or worse, I think this is going to be one of the things people remember about Burchett.
Yeah, that's, it's, like you said, it's yet another Tennessee politician who gets this national notoriety. And I don't think he cares that much, especially coming from The Daily Show, which he would view as a liberal program, and he doesn't care what they think. he said that often, so you just get back to the idea of just giving up. I mean, we don't people are going to speed when they drive. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean we just do away with speed limits.
Right.
It does. There's certain things that you do. I mean, and so the idea that because people kill one another with guns, you can't do anything to keep it from happening is just it kind of runs counter to the to be to be old-fashioned patriotic about it. It goes against the can-do attitude, mm-hmm. That Americans traditionally have. So,
yeah, and I think it also speaks to a national weariness with this issue. I'm sure he's tired of talking about it and thinking about it. I'm sure everybody is. Nobody really has anything new to say about it, seemingly. But it does just leave us in what seems like an endless cycle of gun deaths that we don't have obvious ways to address. And in the meantime, of course, we have a lot of legislatures, including our own, just continuing to... We have more guns than people in this country, according to most of the statistics that I've seen. And we just sort of keep coming up with new ways to encourage more and more people to have more and more guns in more and more places. That seems like the trajectory that we're on, and it is just undeniable that that's accompanied by more and more gun deaths. I mean, it's mm-hmm. the states, you look at, and you can find these statistics online, but states with looser gun laws have more gun deaths. Countries with looser gun laws. The United States has just vastly so many more gun deaths per capita than any other what we call sort of developed nation. So many more that it's not even, if you look at the graph, you have to expand the dimensions of the graph exponentially just to get the United States on it. And people will argue about, well, yes, but states with states or cities with stricter gun laws don't necessarily always have lower murder rates, lower violent crime rates, and that's true. It's a complicated issue, clearly, but at the same time, if you broaden what you're looking at to gun deaths, not just violent crime, but the whole universe of gun deaths, which includes, for example, suicides that I mentioned before, it's just undeniable. Places with more guns have more gun deaths, period. Mm-hmm. And people who want to advocate for more guns maybe ought to face up to that and be honest about it. And I feel like the position that has been taken, and that maybe somebody like Burchett takes, is this kind of like, we want more and more guns, but at the same time, more and more guns doesn't have anything to do with people getting killed with guns. Mm-hmm. And like statistically, that's just like obviously not true. The reality we're living in is a country that has decided to prioritize gun ownership at the expense of having more gun deaths. That is where we are. Whether people want to admit it or not, that's the political decision that's been made, certainly in Tennessee, in the United States as a whole. And I don't have anything else to say about it, so I guess we will move on from talking about it. But it was a very, very sad week in Tennessee, certainly in Nashville. And absolutely, our hearts go out to anybody connected or affiliated with that school and the victims. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, moving on from something that government can't do anything about to something government is doing, which is building a baseball stadium. We can't control guns. We can at least build a baseball stadium. The Sports Authority had a meeting this week where they talked specifically about minority contracting in this downtown stadium project. And we mentioned last week that they had not quite come in at their goal level for the percentage of minority contractors. There was some more discussion about that at the meeting. What happened?
Yeah, the Boyd Sports and RR Land, which is the Randy Boyd's company that is in charge of this. Their contractors, their primary management contractors, led by Denart Construction, put together a diversity business and workforce team, where there are representatives from the firms, the top firms involved. They got a consultant in their job has been to promote minority and woman-owned businesses and veteran-owned businesses, what are termed collectively disadvantaged business enterprises, to recruit them. Now, originally they were going to shoot for 15%. At the urging of the Sports Authority, they raised that to 17%, and so that was the goal: to get 17% of the contract, the dollar amount of the contracts to go to either minority or woman-owned or veteran-owned businesses. And they've, as we've reported, they finally got the budget in for the project's $114 million, and they've gone out and gotten the first tier of contracts, and those are the kind of the big ones. They're kind of umbrella contracts, and whoever's going to do all of the electrical stuff, that firm's been named. Whoever's going to do all of the plumbing stuff, that firm's been named. So, and after that round, the percentage was 15% instead of 17%. 9.5% of that are women-owned businesses. 5.5% are minority-owned, and of that 5%, almost all of it is going to one firm, and that's Elite Diversified Construction Incorporated. It is a black-owned business in East Knoxville, and they're part of the management team anyway. So.
Right. They were their percentage was sort of baked in.
That was already going to be baked in. So the this diversity team met with the Sports Authority. First time the whole team has been there, and got some pointed questions about what they've done, and how far of a net did they fling? What did you? And one of the things, and I think that this really helped the Sports Authority and some others understand a little bit better, at least what they've done, is they went out and actively tried to recruit minority-owned businesses from all over the country. Mm-hmm. One of their members has a minority contracting newsletter, and they send out, all that. So there's been a lot of outreach, and of course, going through the Knoxville Area Urban League, they has spent 2 years trying to build up the capacity of locally owned companies. One of the things is, other than Elite Diversified, there aren't large African American owned contractors.
Right.
We have a dearth of them. There are smaller contractors, but this is a big project. It's a commercial project, so if you've got a residential HVAC company, sorry.
Right. They're not equipped to do a stadium.
No matter what color you are, if you've got if you do residential work, you're not going to get work at this stadium.
Yeah.
And and part of this is what they did was about building capacity. That's getting the expertise, getting numbers of workers, and really, almost more important is being able to get your surety bonds, because you have to be bonded, mm-hmm. and the bigger the contract, the bigger the bond has to be, and there just aren't very many minority-owned firms that can.
Right. Well, Knoxville and Knox County have, first of all, a relatively small minority population. We are the whitest of the major metro areas
Yes.
in Tennessee. And certainly when I worked at the city, this was something that we ran into because we had sort of contracting goals for DBE businesses. And it was very hard. You know, you do the outreach. And I think in this case, working with the Urban League, the stadium folks have made what appear to be good faith efforts to really get out there and try to spread the word and encourage people to apply. But you kind of can't create overnight something that's not there.
Yeah, and one of the issues though they had was now they did, you know, they did put a lot of companies and a lot of people through training. The delay that the Sports Authority, when they put the project on hold last year, really affected this too, because these firms, you know, go through this and they are able to build their capacity. They're able to go after larger projects, and they can't afford to sit around and not work. You know, I mean, that's the thing. And so quite a few of those companies went out and got other work, and now they're busy. Right. You know, and Phil Snickles, who was just recently retired as the head of the Urban League, said, you know, everyone who completed our training is working right now. And so it's you know, and that's one of the things that sometimes gets lost in this is the you know, the Urban League's goal in particular is to increase the capacity of minority and women-owned firms, not just for the stadium project, but they can go on and do other projects after that and continue to grow and continue to build wealth for their owners and their employees. So in that sense, you know, that portion of it, you know, looks like it's, you know, they're meeting that goal. But as far as work on the stadium, yes, they still haven't. But there are still opportunities for more, because the way construction contracts are, you've got these tier 1 contracts, and they're the big ones, as I mentioned earlier. But then the tier 1 contractors have tier 2 subcontractors who get them supplies, who provide
work on specific parts of the contract.
Right. You know, you might have the plumbing contract, and you've got one group that roughs it in, and you know, another group that comes in and does the finishing work. You know, because in a complex, massive scale like this, you know, just being able to replace a faucet does not make you a plumber who can work on a stadium project. So, but so there are more opportunities for smaller contractors who don't necessarily need they don't need as much capacity to get a surety bond for their portion of the work. And then below them, there are tier 3 subcontractors who are even smaller and do even more specialized work. And so there are opportunities for more contracts. I don't know if it'd be enough to add up to 2% more.
Right, they're at 15% right now. The goal was 17%, and so they're going to try to, because as each of those contracts get progressively smaller, of course, that's a tinier and tinier portion of the budget.
You know, if you know, we know the 114 million, 13 million of them's already been pretty much done. So basically, if we want to round it down a little bit, $100 million. So you know, these larger ones, like Elite Diversified, their shares 5%. If we're talking $100 million, they're going to get $5 million.
Right.
Well, somebody who gets a much smaller one's only going to get, you know, it might be $500,000.
Right.
It might be $250,000. Well, it takes it takes quite a few $250,000 contracts to add up to $2 million or so.
Right.
So anyway, now they had some critics there. Reverend Sam Brown, who's the head of the NAACP, was there. Councilwoman Gwen McKenzie read a statement from her husband, State Representative Sam McKenzie, which was absolutely scathing. It was he was very disappointed, disheartened that they had not met their goals, and because it had been sold to them as a big economic benefit for the African American community in East Knoxville, and but of course he wasn't at the meeting. He was in the he was doing legislative stuff in Nashville. But Gwen McKenzie, the councilwoman, said that it kind of changed her perspective. She was more of the line of Sam's original thinking, that it was this, that it just was, they were failures for not meeting this. But she said it was good to see the team in person, and she was changed her perspective a little bit. Reverend Brown also said, while he's still disappointed, there's a chance that and he hopes they are able to take advantage of the time and the added initiative, and they're still going to be doing this work. So it's a little bit more of a he sees more of a glimmer of hope than he did before the meeting started. And one of the things that's interesting is this is often viewed as a project by Randy Boyd, businessman, UT president, white man, that is kind of imposing this project on the East Knoxville community, which is predominantly African American. But it was interesting. The diversity team were all people of color. And principals too in their businesses. They want not just a token trotted out there to make it look good. One of them was a guy named Edward Henley III. He is he's consulting with them on diversity issues. He's African American, went to the University of Tennessee, and and he's very. One of the things he said was, I've never missed a minority hiring goal, and I'm not going to start now. He's very determined to
drag them across that 17% line one way or another.
And that was, and I think that when people saw that, this wasn't a bunch of white males talking about how they were going to be diverse. These were mostly African Americans who were all people of color, and so I think that kind of showed that could show some people that it is a good faith, sincere effort. And one of the other things, and I almost forgot to mention this, and this was brought up by Henley and by Randall Turman, who is the principal owner of Elite Diversified, is that they put out this net. A lot of African American contractors in Nashville, not a far way to go, but there's so much work going on in Nashville.
Right.
They don't need and they're not going to come over here for a one-off stadium project.
Yep. When
they've got high-rise apartment buildings and stadium projects of their own and all kinds of other things over there. So it's Turman. In fact, his company has done a lot of work in Nashville because there's more work for them to do in Nashville. And Henley was saying that it just doesn't make sense for Nashville firms to come over to Knoxville and work and
they're probably not going to get paid any more doing work in Knoxville than they
probably less
do in Nashville,
actually.
Right?
And again, that goes to Knoxville itself. Knox County don't have a large enough pool of African American contractors who could do this kind of work, and Nashville does. but they're all busy.
Right.
So it's they'll be letting out more contracts, in the coming weeks and months as this progresses, so we'll see if Henley is able to meet the goal or if this will be the first time he's not been able to.
Right. Well, certainly we will report on it either way. Okay, shifting gears, there was an interesting court decision in a lawsuit. Actually, the decision was filed on March 17th. We just wrote about it this past week. The 6th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals heard a case in which an autistic student and his family have sued the school system, arguing basically that they have not provided him with what federal education law requires in terms of the services that they're providing. Specifically, they want their son, who's identified only as MQ in the lawsuit, to, as much as possible, be in mainstream classrooms with other non-disabled children, because they say that in his preschool, he does have developmental delays and challenges, but that in his preschool setting, he did much better in settings where he was around in what they call blended classrooms, where we have some disabled students and also some non-disabled students, whereas Knox County had placed him primarily, at least for his academic work, in a separate classroom only for disabled students, which tends to have, it's a range of disabilities, but often you have very seriously disabled students in those classrooms. And so there is a concept under federal education law called the least restrictive environment, which says that a student with disabilities should be placed in the least restrictive environment available, that the default should be as much placement in mainstream classrooms as possible. And so these parents had fought with the school system about this placement, and when they couldn't get changes, they asked for, there's a whole sort of legal system set up specifically for these kinds of cases. They have a due process hearing with an administrative law judge. So they filed that complaint in, I think, 2019. The administrative law judge found in the family's favor and said, yes, the county was violating his rights, and they should, accede to the parents' wishes. The county chose not to accept that, and this is the county law department kind of running the defense for the school system, because they represent the school system. And they asked it to be heard by a U.S. district court judge. You have to go to a federal court because it's a federal education law. The district court judge found in the family's favor and said, yes, the school system violated his rights and they should provide him what he's asking for. The law department did not accept that and appealed it up to the 6th Circuit. And so this month, a panel of the 6th Circuit Court also came in and said that the school system had violated the student's rights and they should provide him with the setting they asked for. So 4 years later, basically, after initially asking for this, the school system has been told they have to do this. And, the case is interesting itself, but for advocates for special education students and their families, it is sort of one more example of what they say is a pattern of the school system refusing to provide services and resources that they legally should provide, and forcing parents and students to go to court. And in court, the school system tends to lose these cases. They don't lose every single special education case, but they lose a lot of them. And Kim Kretich, who is a local parent and advocate, she kind of got involved in the work because she has a son with disabilities who's now graduated from high school, but she's still engaged with kind of the local disability community because she's made herself into an expert on these issues. She worked with this family to file their initial complaint. And after this ruling came down, she said, basically, I told them so. And I keep telling them so. And she does. She shows up at school board meetings a lot and kind of, she's always very polite in how she presents it, but she kind of keeps coming back to the school board saying, what you're doing isn't working. You're not providing the services people need, and that you are clearly supposed to be providing, because when they go to court, mostly they win. And in the meantime, you're denying education to children who need it, and you're costing the county a lot of money in fighting all of these cases. And so she said she hopes that it's one more sort of impetus and incentive for the school system to really take a good look at how they do these things. Superintendent John Ryswick, separate from this lawsuit, he has already ordered a kind of top-to-bottom review of special education services. And so Kim Credit and other parents who are involved in advocating for students with disabilities are hopeful that, that will be a comprehensive look that will address some of the issues that they feel like have been neglected for years now. And we will have some more coverage about that whole process as it moves forward. But it was an interesting lawsuit, and sort of just, another example of the school system choosing to, because it is a choice by them whether you're going to go and fight these things or provide the services, choosing to fight it, and then, years later losing anyway.
Yeah, and it makes it sound like that since it probably is easier for the school system to put students with disabilities into more restrictive environments. That way you've got them in one place, and the schools, the mainstream classrooms, don't the teachers in there don't have to
less
make accommodations.
disruptive.
Less, even if it's not disruptive, they have to make accommodations, and so it can be more of an interruption than a disruption, maybe. But it's federal law is federal law, and you need to follow it. I guess it's a way to use the legal system to kick the can down the road. We can, we'll fight it in court and worry about it another day if we lose.
Well, and saying federal law is federal law, it's interesting. This claim was filed under the IDEA, which is the umbrella federal special education law. That law only does apply in states and school systems that accept federal education funding. Now, a lot of federal education funding goes specifically to provide services and resources to students with disabilities. And we talked about this past week, that there was a proposal in the legislature to create this year from House Speaker Cameron Sexton to create a committee to study whether Tennessee might want to just opt out of federal education funding altogether. This is an example of the kinds of things where if they weren't receiving this money, that claim couldn't have been filed under the IDEA because it wouldn't apply. However, that particular proposal seems to have been sort of sidelined for the year. Of course, as we know, nothing's dead in the legislature until the session's over, sometimes not even then. So we'll continue to track that. But for now, that seems like it's going to be pushed aside. But this is an example of kind of what Sexton is maybe talking about, that, well, if we didn't have the federal funding, we wouldn't it would free us from some federal mandates, which is true. But those federal mandates are things to take care of students with disabilities, low-income students. Is that really kind of the path you want to go down, denying those services? But then the other thing is that there are other federal disability laws. There's the Americans with Disabilities Act, which applies to everybody, regardless of whether you take federal funding. However, it was interesting that part of this lawsuit was also filed under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the courts at all levels, while upholding the claim under IDEA, they did not find a claim under the ADA, and so suggesting that, yes, if there weren't the IDEA law in effect here, maybe the student wouldn't have a claim. But that's kind of something that if we ever got to the point where Tennessee wasn't receiving federal funding and therefore didn't have to abide by the IDEA, I do think you would see a lot of cases filed under the ADA, and we would find out to what degree there are other protections for students beyond just these laws that are tied to federal funding. Okay, let's talk about the legislature a little bit more. Just a quick update on the election bill that we have talked about that would change how Knoxville City Council races are run. That took another step this past week toward becoming law.
Speaking of legislation that does not die, and we talked about that last week. This bill would change the way Knoxville does its elections, as we've talked about before. And this would only affect city council races for primary seats. For district seats. Wouldn't affect at-large voting. Wouldn't affect city council or mayor. But for those district seats, currently there's a primary. Usually 2 or more candidates run in the primary, top 2 vote getters, then go on to the general election. But in the primary, only district voters vote. In the general election, all voters citywide vote in all the district races. So you have had these instances in the past where someone will be the top vote getter in their district, and then they go on to the general election and lose citywide. So they're the choice of the district, but not of the citywide voters. And then most often, though, it's the other way around. The citywide vote affirms the selection of the district. Representative Elaine Davis in the House and Senator Richard Briggs in the Senate sponsored legislation that would do away with that. If you have a district seat, then in both the primary and the general election, only those district voters can vote for that. Well, that does, that fundamentally changes how, how the elections would go, how election strategy goes. But Briggs actually tried to. He was more skeptical of it. Davis got it through the House pretty easily, and Knoxville is one of only 2 cities that we know of in the state.
Right. This is a very unusual election system. We should say.
Yeah, it is an exception to the state law. The state law generally requires district-only voting for a district representative. Knoxville and Morristown are the only 2 cities that we know of that don't do it that way, that take advantage of the exception that's in state law. The bill would eliminate that exception, and it applies statewide, so no other cities could adopt the new thing. So, but anyway, it passed easily in the House. In the Senate, Briggs basically put it on the shelf for a while, but then Frank Nicely, who is the senator representing Strawberry Plains, just to the east of Knoxville, but not in Knoxville.
Not in Knox County.
And not even in Knox County, took over sponsorship of the bill. It was heard in the State and Local Government Committee this past week, and it passed out of the committee. Briggs ended up voting for it. The only vote against it was Jeff Yarbrough, who's a senator from Nashville, which is a city that's had its own problems with legislative action.
Right. Jeff Yarbrough is probably not feeling very happy about legislative interference in local matters overall.
No, and that's one of the arguments that the city made. Fiona McAnally, who's the legislative director for city government, testified at the hearing, saying that Knoxville is a home rule charter city. It's that way for a reason. Any decisions that need to be made about how we conduct our election, we should be the ones to make them. Even as far as saying that Vice Mayor Andrew Roberto, who is basically that means he's the head of the city council, is had promised to hold public hearings and put it in motion to see if we needed to change our charter. And all that kind of fell on deaf ears. No one, like I said, only Yarborough voted for it. There were a couple of abstentions. I don't know if that was more they just didn't understand Knoxville's system, which is a pretty common thing outside of the city of Knoxville. So now it's going on. It's in the calendar committee. It'll be put on the calendar for a floor vote in the Senate. That will probably be next week. The Senate is meeting in the floor session even as we record this, but that bill is not on that agenda. So I'm assuming that it's going to be next week when they take that up. Once if it passes in the Senate and because it passed out of committee with Republican support, the Republican supermajority will probably pass it and go to Governor Lee, assuming he signs it and doesn't veto it. Then we'll change the way we do elections. That'll be presumably this year. And now it only affects one race this year. The 5th district seat is on this election cycle.
Right. The other seats are all the at-large seats.
Yeah. So if this passes, it won't affect 5th district voters at all, except that they will be the ones to pick they were representing the general election. The others on the ballot, they're at-large members. 5th district voters vote for them. They're mayors on the ballot. They can vote in that one. Where it gets weird is the next election cycle, which is when the other 5 district council seats are up. Now they're all term limited, so it'll be a new batch of candidates, but people in the 5th district won't vote at all.
Right.
There's no reason for them. There's nothing on the ballot for them to vote for. So whereas the voters in those 5 districts will be voting this time because we got the mayor on the ballot and the at-large people.
Right.
So we'll have 5 districts in the city who will vote every other. The voters will vote every other year. We got one district, 5th district, which is kind of northwest Knoxville.
My home district.
Yes. Well, you'll only get to vote once every 4 years in the city election.
Right.
So.
Well, and that is an interesting thing about this because, Elaine Davis, in presenting it, said that this is protecting the voting rights of district voters so that their choice, is the one that represents them. At the same time, it is, in fact, taking away the right to vote from all city voters because right now, all city voters get to vote in the general elections for all 6 districts. Mm-hmm. And now you're going to be reduced to just voting for your own district, the 3 at-large seats, and then, of course, the mayor and municipal judge. But it is actually literally taking the vote away. Now, philosophically, you can certainly argue, one way or another, whether it's better to have the district represented by somebody elected by the people in the district. Like, there is definitely a logic to that, and that is the way almost every other election in the state is run. But there's no getting around that you're also taking away actual voting power from all city voters because you're going to lose the right to vote in 5 of the 6 district races. And Charlie Thomas, who currently represents the 5th district, made the point at the meeting that City Council had about this, that if this change happens, Council might want to revisit the way those elections are structured and not have the 5th district kind of stranded out on this off-year cycle.
Yeah, and but this change would alter quite a bit. The district races, the candidates would not have to raise as much money because they don't. Whoever's running in South, for the 1st district seat in South Knoxville, won't have to go to Fountain City, won't have to go to West Knoxville, won't have to go to West Hills or whatever to get votes. They just stay in their district, so that it's a less expensive thing. So candidates of more modest means might be able to gain traction, especially someone who has a good reputation as a as someone who's very involved in the community, but they don't necessarily have access to people with a lot of actual cash. So that could be the case. But one thing it takes away is whoever is our next person from the first district. I'll keep it there. They won't have the one-on-one relationships with people in West Hills, with people in Fountain City, with people in Cumberland Estates.
Because they're not spending 2 months out there knocking on doors.
Yeah, they're not knocking on doors. They're not meeting, business and community leaders in those areas, and that's one of the things with Tennessee's, Public Open Meetings Act. It's skating on thin ice to talk to the representative from that district about what's going on in that district. So if you personally have contacts in that district, then you can get the pulse of it. Whereas now they'll be flying in the dark.
Right.
So.
Well, and I guess we should mention there is another election bill floating around out there that may or may not have legs this year.
Yeah, it's a bill that would pave the way for partisan elections in cities. And what it would do is basically put the ball in the political parties' court. If a political party wanted to make it a partisan race, they can, or they could if this passes, and if they don't, it wouldn't be. Very similar to the way the school board is. Now that was another one that failed to die. There was a procedural glitch that killed it earlier in the session, and then it's funny they brought it back. There's something called a caption bill in the legislature. It's just kind of got a generic caption that's
kind of a placeholder. It's like, this bill is going to be about elections, but you don't actually know what it's going to be.
Yeah, it doesn't have any real text to it. And you can amend it and put a new bill in there, and that's what they did. They brought that bill back and rewrote a caption bill and put that forward, and it's passed, so it's moving forward. And this is one thing that it probably has a really good chance of getting through, because I think the legislatures, last go around passed the school board law, so it's you think it's it's pretty much the same makeup.
Right, municipal elections are the last nonpartisan elections left in the state.
Right,
so
their days are numbered, I think.
It will be interesting to see, like, if it passes this year, for example. With the school board, it was pretty predictable that yes, the parties, at least like in Knox County, the Republican Party was going to decide to hold partisan, field partisan candidates, because the county overall and most of the county districts are more Republican, and so you could kind of see that it was in the Republican parties, and they saw it as an advantage to have somebody on the ballot with an R next to their name. And once they did that, then the Democratic Party said, okay, we will too, basically, although they said they didn't think it was a good idea. In this particular case, I don't know. It's unclear yet. Certainly Buddy Burchett, the new county Republican Party chair, when we talked to him here on the podcast a few weeks ago, made it sound like the party is not planning to take nearly as active a role in trying to field explicitly Republican candidates for council this year as it did a couple of years ago. And if you look at who's running and the makeup of those races, the idea that there is a Republican advantage to having partisan elections within the city is a lot shakier, because the city overall, now in some districts there may be, but the city overall votes pretty, Democratic, depending on the race and the candidate. And so I don't know. And for example, some of the people running this year may not, especially the incumbents seeking re-election, might not have any interest in running with a party label, whatever their party is. Yeah. And it's a little more unpredictable how that would shake out in the city.
It is, especially the first time around. Like, if this passes, and goes into effect immediately, I mean, yeah, there would be time, a little bit of time, for someone to, for the party to recruit somebody to run in a race before the qualifying deadline passes. But the window's very short, so it might not have a real effect this year.
Right. So even if it passes, we still might not have partisan elections in city council this year. But by the time we came around to 2 years from now, that may be different.
2 years from now, it could be different. I would imagine that if one party says they want the elections to be partisan, then the other major party will as well.
Yeah, and well, again, in the city, the Democratic Party stands to theoretically gain because more districts within the city have Democratic voting majorities than Republican voting majorities. And one thing that's very hard for Democrats in Knox County right now is to have actual elected Democrats, because all the partisan races are in county races, and so all of the countywide seats are held by Republicans, and basically we have 2 Democrats on county commission and then 2 Democrats and 2 independents at the moment on the school board. Everybody else is a Republican. But in the city, if you make those partisan races, suddenly you could have, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe more actual elected Democrats in office, which from a party standpoint is not a bad thing. You have more of your people who are explicitly identified and are running with party support and party organization for those seats, which among other things gives you a base of people to recruit from to run for state offices and so forth. And so even though this is something that is being pushed by the Republican supermajority in the legislature, in the near term, it's not hard to see how it, at least within the big cities, it really could be more to the advantage of the Democratic parties than the Republicans.
It could be. I mean, one of the, if we just look back at kind of the recent history of elections, the 3rd district at Northwest Knoxville is one that has had the top vote getter go on to the general election and lose in several cases. And it is probably the most conservative of the districts as a whole, within the city. But on the other hand, so you think, okay, well, they've got a really good shot. The Republicans have a really good shot there, and they do. They would have a really good shot in that district
with a good candidate.
Yeah. However, then you go with the at-large citywide races, and we can go to Janet Testerman as an example, who's a Republican. Everybody knew she was a Republican, but as a non-partisan race, she didn't run as a Republican when she ran 4 years ago, and she ran as a candidate, just on her own.
Community leader.
Her party affiliation was not mentioned once. And she won very easily. And but then last year, she ran as a Republican for the state house seat that Elaine Davis eventually won. She ran there. She started weighing in on, of course, state issues and
social issues
that she didn't have to weigh in on as a council member, because council doesn't consider these things. Well, there were a lot of Democrats who voted for her, who were very angry and determined not to vote for her this time around. Now, of course, she decided not to run.
Right.
That wasn't a reason she gave, but
it may have been a reason she thought about.
It may have been a reason she thought about, and it would have been something that'd be kind of interesting to watch, because she kind of outed herself as a Republican, and she would be, it would just be interesting. I would think that partisan races would benefit especially the at-large seats the benefit would go to the Democrats.
Yeah, well, we will certainly see how all of that shakes out. Wanted to mention quickly, it's funny, you were talking earlier about Reverend Sam Brown with the NAACP and reading a statement from Representative Sam McKenzie at the Sports Authority meeting. There was a press conference on Wednesday this past week organized by Reverend Sam Brown and the NAACP, where he also read a statement from Representative Sam McKenzie. So it's been a busy week for Reverend Brown and for him reading statements from Representative McKenzie. But this press conference was for the local branch of the NAACP to register its objections to an application for a new charter school in Knox County, which we have talked about. It's this group out of Chattanooga. They have a school there called Chattanooga Prep. It's an all-boys school. They want to open something in Knoxville called the Knoxville Preparatory School, Knoxville Prep, which will also be an all-boys school serving grades 6 through 12. They have put in their application. The school system's internal charter review committee has analyzed it, looked through it, and has recommended that the school board approve it because it meets all of the, the state lays out a lot of guidelines that metrics that charter schools have to meet. And so that is coming to the school board next week for consideration and possible approval. And so the Knoxville branch of the NAACP came out also with support from Representative McKenzie and support from some other Democrats who were there at the press conference, opposing this, saying that their concern is not so much with the educational program that the school is offering. Either Reverend Brown or Representative McKenzie, I can't remember which, said probably it'll be fine academically, like for the kids who are there. Their concern is that that school will attract maybe the highest performing students or the most engaged parents from schools in and around sort of urban Knoxville. Their particular concerns are with like Vine Middle School, Whittle Springs Middle School, which have both have a lot of lower income and African American students. Knoxville Prep has said that those are the kinds of students it wants to serve. It wants to serve disadvantaged students. It wants to provide opportunities for them. It will target them with marketing and advertising. Now, students at those schools can already transfer out of them if they want to. If there's an available slot in another school in the county, you can already transfer, and so that already does happen. But what doesn't happen is, Farragut doesn't come into East Knoxville, Farragut High School doesn't come into East Knoxville and distribute flyers saying, sign your kid up for Farragut High School. It's awesome. Look at these pictures of our new computer lab or whatever. Yeah. And that's what is going to happen with this school. And so,
well, and one thing too, Farragut, that's a long haul for somebody who is zoned to go to Whittle Springs.
Yeah.
But the charter school, which is going to be the Boys and Girls Club in North Knoxville, it's stone's throw away from Whittle Springs, and not far from Vine.
Exactly.
So it's not like parents are much less likely to take a child who's zoned for Whittle Springs and send them to Carnes or send them to Bearden or send them to South Doyle. But if your option's only a few blocks away, think about it.
Yeah, and with transportation provided, which they are going to provide, sure. And so that's the NAACP's concern is that if you pull enough of those students out of those schools, because those schools, a lot of our urban schools have lower student populations already than the larger suburban schools. You could potentially push one of those schools to not have enough students to stay open. Maybe you would lose a school, have to consolidate. You wouldn't be able to have the resources that they currently have for the students who would still be there, who didn't leave. Those are their concerns, and so they actually asked the applicants to withdraw their application. Now, that is clearly not going to happen. No. Far from withdrawing their application, Knoxville Prep has been running what I have to say is a very efficient, professional, and well-organized public relations campaign. They've responded at every step to each of these concerns and criticism. The NAACP sent a letter to all the school board members raising these concerns, asking them to vote against it. The Knoxville Prep people followed up with their own letter to school board members addressing kind of point by point those concerns. After this press conference that the NAACP had, the Knoxville prep folks sent out a long letter from an officer at the NAACP branch in Chattanooga, saying, she was a woman, Edna Varner, who is part of the NAACP there. She's also a retired school teacher, and she is on the board of the Chattanooga Prep School. And she said in her letter, look, I had all of these same concerns. I represent the same kind of areas that you're talking about. But in fact, she thinks the school has been really good, that they're doing a good thing, and that it's a good amenity, a benefit to the students in those urban areas to have this school. So all of this is going to be talked about at the school board this coming week. As we have said before, the way state law is written, it's actually very, very difficult for a school board to turn down a charter application. They have to find real flaws in the application and the plan for the school. The fact that it was recommended for approval by the district's committee, I think, makes it even less likely that the school board is going to turn this down. But I do think there's going to be an awful lot of talk about it at school board meetings next week, and a lot of probably public input as well on all sides of the issue. So we will no doubt talk about that more next week. Okay, we are coming up now toward our interview segment with Jim Snowden, the Senior Director of Engineering and Public Works for Knox County, to catch us up on the Advance Knox planning process. We have talked about this process before. It's something the county is doing to update its comprehensive general plan and its transportation plan. Those plans are 20 to 40 years old, depending on which one you're looking at. And they have been going through their most recent and final round of public input this past week. If you did not make it to any of the meetings where it was talked about this week, you still have time to give input. You can go to the website at advanceknox.org, review the sort of preferred scenario for future growth and development that they have laid out there, as well as give some thoughts on what you think the priorities should be for transportation improvements across the county. And I guess with that, let's just go to our talk with Jim and let him tell us all about it. Joining us this week on the podcast, actually his second visit to the podcast, joining the small but growing circle of repeat guests, is Jim Snowden, who is the Senior Director of Engineering and Public Works for Knox County government. And we're here to talk once again about Advance Knox. And so we have talked about this before. This is a planning update that the county is doing. You all have been working on this for about a year now. And we are now in the third round of public input. So Jim, welcome. And I guess, can you just kind of tell us what's been going on this week? I know you've had a whole lot of meetings.
Sure. Glad, and I appreciate you guys having me on again. Honored to have an opportunity to talk through this, and you giving us the opportunity to kind of push this out to the public. You're exactly right. This is our last round of public engagement called Priorities Week. We've had three in-person meetings. One virtual meeting today that had about 45 people. We'll have a meeting tonight and a meeting tomorrow night, and then another virtual meeting next week. And then the website obviously will be advanceknox.org will be available anytime, and we'll be taking and considering comments until the Good Friday. So encourage everybody to go to advanceknox.org and just participate. This Priorities Week is kind of the accumulation of the process. The first round of engagement was ideas. We kind of met with the folks back, last year, talked to them about what they treasured in Knox County, what they desired to see it look like over the next 20 years. Took that data, then had a second round that talked about scenarios, and gave the public three different scenarios. And now we've kind of taken all that data and compiled into what we feel like is a draft preferred scenario, and want to get this last round of public input to further hone that before we eventually take it to the leadership and legislative bodies.
So people who haven't been to the meetings can go to the website and actually see the sort of proposed maps that you all have put out there.
And obviously, a big focus of this has been to update the county's existing plans, which are 20 years old or so. Could you pick out just a handful of things that are the big in this preferred scenario that you're presenting? What are the 3 or 4 things that stand out that are updates, that are changes from that older plan that we're still working with?
Sure. And that's something we've tried to be very conscious of, because one of the things that Mayor Jacobs wanted us to do on the onset was to be, have this plan be very fiscally responsible. And some of the sprawl of growth that we've seen over the past couple of years isn't necessarily fiscally responsible, or it's not very favorable for our constituents. We've heard a lot of that. So what we've tried to do is look at town centers to where, one of the things we heard a lot was people, they wanted to have a sense of community. If you live in Corrington, that's your community. If you live in Carter's your community. And, we want to create town centers where there's commercial and retail nearby those residents, so that they don't have to leave those small centers for, just the essential services. And that helps us from a fiscal perspective. One of the other things that we heard was corridor development and redevelopment. We have a lot of big state highways that have a lot of transportation capacity, utility capacity, and really are underutilized in the sense of, residential and commercial. So if you look at the website and you see these proposed land use maps, that's what you'll see. You'll see those are the 2 things that really, jump out to me. One of the other things is really the transportation component that, we tried to be very strategic about making sure that, we use these existing state routes, or, in instances where we are going to grow, residential and or commercial, you're going to see some new capacity projects. And that's something we've never done. We've always been reactive to that. We've looked and, had to follow where the traffic went. And, now this plan's going to look and say, okay, we're going to grow, in this area of the county's capital plan roadway budget's going to, invest in those areas before that. So once again, it goes back to that fiscally responsible goal that the mayor signed with us, and we're excited about the plan. We think it addresses a lot of the things that the mayor asked us to do, as well as what the constituents have told us before and during the process.
You talk about doing more of a town center approach, and yet there's also a lot of corridor development. How big of a change is this from current practice?
It's pretty big. I mean, because one of the things that we want to do is, one of the things that we heard a lot of people say is they want to preserve a lot of the rural character of Knox County. And, to do that and to accept this, I think 70,000 people is what we anticipate, Scott, to be coming into our community in the next 20 years. We can't do that at the traditional 3 to 5 dwelling units an acre, kind of sporadically placed throughout the county. So in these town centers, you're going to see a lot higher density. You're going to see, multi-story things that probably you wouldn't necessarily expect to see or anticipate seeing with our current land use plan. And, that we want to be able to accommodate both those desires. We need to be able to preserve that rural character, and that's the way in which we think we can do
it. Jim, when I talked to you earlier this week, you said one of the things that had surprised you a little bit in going through this process was how much emphasis you heard on pedestrian access from all parts of the county, whether people were living in more rural or suburban areas or more urbanized areas. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure, be glad to. I was at Bricky McLeod in kind of between Halls and Powell last night, and it was the thing that, once again, people really, really stressed. We given people an opportunity to, interact with the plan and put, color coded dots on a map, and it's pretty visual. You look at that, I mean, it's pretty obvious that that's still, even in any area of the county, that's something that people have really desired. It's something that being at the county 25 years now is something that, when I first started, that, people didn't really ask for things like that. They were asking for, signalization projects and capacity projects. And, it's kind of nice to see that is something that people are considering, because at the end of the day, it helps the transportation network. It takes cars off the road and, hopefully gets people involved in more of a healthier lifestyle. So it has a lot of benefits, and it's something that's really kind of surprised me that even in the more rural parts of the county, we've heard a lot of the desire to have pedestrian facilities.
So is that something that will be reflected, say, in future county capital budgets, more investment in sidewalks and pedestrian networks? Because I know a lot of places, even where we have sidewalks now, they're not necessarily connected to anything.
We've asked our consultant, Kimberly Holt, as these transportation improvements that we have, whether they're, the capacity related stuff, that we build that into that, bake that into that cake, as well as looking to your point about, you're right, you got these missing, these segments that don't connect. We've asked them to prioritize those for us, and especially where, the PRZ, the parental responsibility zone, or commercial and other, what we would consider to be attractors exist. So, yeah, I think you're going to see our capital plan reflect those desires, as well as the transportation components, a little more than they have in the past.
Scott, you have anything else you want to hit on?
Well, one of the things I wanted to find out is as this plan moves forward, is it going to require a lot of changes to the zoning code? The city of Knoxville, redid their zoning code a couple of years ago completely, and I wouldn't anticipate that from the county. But is it going to require some substantial changes?
It will, Scott. Great question. And that's actually what we're planning on doing next year as part of our fiscal year ask for the finance for our budget, is to update our zoning code. Because a lot of these place types that we have, or we're, I guess, proposing as part of this land use plan, they don't exist in our zoning code. So to make those things a reality, we've got to update our zoning code. And once again, our zoning code, much like our land use plan, 40 years old. I mean, it's twice the age of the land use plan. So we want to, I've asked for a budget request in the fiscal, upcoming fiscal year, to engage a consultant, and over the next, 12 to 18 months, just do exactly that. And one of the things we also want to do as part of that is incorporate all our development processes into that. Right now, if you look across our, development process, we've got about 10 different ordinances. We've got a stormwater ordinance, a floodplain ordinance, road standard ordinance. You got all these different things, and they're all scattered throughout the code. We want to bring all those into one document, development manual, that is, to where it just makes things easier for, just everyday citizen as well as the developer to understand our process. And so, yeah, that's we get done with all the Advance Knox work. That's the next big lift. So there's no rest for the weary.
And that's obviously where you can get into conflicts sometimes, right? Because when everybody can sort of be in favor of things conceptually, yeah, we like more density in some places, we like preserving some rural areas, but when it comes down to exactly what's going to be allowed where, which is what the zoning really sets out, that's where sometimes it's harder to get everybody's buy-in.
Yeah, for sure, Jesse. That's exactly what I mean. There's, that's something that we'll have probably more outreach of that in that process than we even did in this, because you are, like you said, you're changing the land use that person has as a right. So we want to be very conscious of those property rights, but also, move forward with a plan that we have today that is what the community's told us that their wishes are. And so it's going to be a challenge, but we're excited about it, and it's something that really needs to happen. And the mayor's very supportive of that. So we're looking forward to getting it started.
So I guess the next actual step from this, right, is you have to actually update the growth policy plan first, right? Because any plan that the county adopts has to be in sync with the growth policy plan. So if you want to update this plan, you have to update that. And that requires bringing in the city of Knoxville and the town of Farragut. There was an attempt to do that a couple of years ago, and Farragut actually ended up being the body that backed off of it and didn't want to do it. So do you feel like, I know the city and the town have been engaged in this process. Do you feel like that'll be something you can work through with all of those parties?
Well, we believe so, Jesse. We've done a really good job of engaging not only their engineering teams, but the really the leadership and the legislative bodies. We've done updates with both the town aldermen and the city council, and we've asked them what their priorities are. We've sent them some documentation and said, hey, this is the plan we're proposing. These are our priorities. What are your priorities to support this plan? So, and that's kind of what, when we went through that process, back a couple of years ago, that's what they were concerned about. So we've listened to those concerns, and we certainly want to make sure that this process goes much smoother than that.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's probably a good place to end it. People can go to advanceknox.org through this coming Friday to provide feedback, and then I'm sure we'll be continuing to check in with you because, as you say, there's still a lot of steps between here and when everything's in place.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you guys. Anytime I can ever come on or give you guys information, I'd certainly be glad to, and look forward to meeting you guys again.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Really appreciate it.
Thanks again to Jim Snowden for talking with us. And again, if you have not taken the opportunity, go to advanceknox.org and learn more about that whole plan. Okay, looking ahead to this coming week, we have a couple of things. As we mentioned earlier, the Knox County School Board is having its monthly meetings. They'll have their work session Monday and their voting meeting on Thursday. Both of those start at 5 p.m. in their Summer Place boardroom. There are a couple of potentially interesting things on the agenda, but I think those meetings are likely to be mostly dominated by discussion of the charter school application and then the vote on it on Thursday. So certainly we will see what happens there. And then on Tuesday, City Council is meeting.
Yeah, City Council's meeting 6 o'clock on Tuesday, main assembly room of the City County building. The budget isn't set yet, or at least hasn't been released yet.
You mean the agenda?
I'm sorry, the agenda. Budget. The agenda. And the now a preliminary agenda has been floating around, and it's but it's very preliminary. Things can be added to the agenda. Until it comes out, and right now it doesn't look very like there are very many controversial issues on there. There are a couple of decent sized contracts. There's a $2.2 million contract up for grabs for a Kingston Pike connections project, which is supposed to improve connections to Kingston Pike. And then they're also going to be seeking a $3.6 million grant from the Department of Transportation to install electric bus charging equipment at the downtown station for CAT. So, but other than that, there's some other smaller contracts, some non-controversial rezonings and things like that. So we'll see if anything else gets added, though. We'll be on top of it.
And we will talk about those things and anything else that happens next week. In the meantime, thanks as always to Seth Barber for his production work at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright. And I am getting ready to go get my big ears on.
Me too.
All right. We'll see y'all next time.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.